My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hello, it's me, Sam Baker. And before we go on with the show, I want to tell you about an exciting new initiative coming from The Shift. Many of you have asked how you can support the podcast further and get more Shift into the bargain. Well, now you have the opportunity to do just that by joining the Shift community. You can go to steady.media/The Shift and become a member of The Shift. In return for supporting the podcast, you'll receive exclusive weekly newsletters, community membership, and plenty of other perks aimed at bringing us all closer together. That's steady.media/The Shift. Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. Today's guest is nothing less than an acting legend, although she probably wouldn't have much truck with that. Dame Sheila Hancock is that rare thing, a successful actor with working-class roots, an 89-year-old who's still beating off offers with a stick, and a woman who refuses to be afraid to speak her mind. Sheila has done everything, from Shakespeare to sitcoms. A member of the National Theatre Company, she was the first woman to direct at the Olivier Theatre in her 50s and has been nominated for 6 Olivier Awards, written 2 novels and a loose trilogy of memoirs. The third is Old Rage, which started out as a book about the wisdom and fulfilment of old age and ended up not.
What they need is somebody to listen to them and make it happen. But I think the young people are looking for a better world, and we've just got to make it possible for them to achieve it.
90 next year, Sheila is taking less prisoners than ever. She joined me from her living room to talk education and inequality, corruption, climate change and Brexit, suffering from the empathy disease, and why being seen as a strong woman is a double-edged sword. Sheila Hancock for PM. You're very tech savvy. I'm very impressed.
Well, I'm not really, I haven't had to do a Zoom for a few days and I get out of the way of it. I haven't got an iPad thing. I've got a Dell because I had that years and years ago and it links with my computer. And it's got a very bad link thing, so I've had to have a wire that goes right across my room to the box thing, So I've just been fiddling with that. So that may have helped. But I don't really understand it all. I do it, but I don't really understand it.
You can do it. That's enough. There's no point understanding it because it'll change again next week anyway. So
I know. That's a terrible thing. I call on my grandchildren when I'm absolutely desperate. I only learned during lockdown, actually.
Yeah, that must have been a bit of a baptism of fire, was it?
It was, because people forget. People of my generation, if you weren't a typist, and there were lots of those, women did all the typing in those days, men didn't type at all. But when computers first came in, Amstrad computers that did all these magical things, I'd never done anything like that in my life before. So I started right from having to understand how to do a keyboard and all that. And then, of course, when it expanded and phones and all that sort of thing, the children start at a very knowledgeable platform. That's what they've known all their lives. The poor old farts like me, it's got to start right from the beginning, and every now and then when they start talking jargon to me, I just say, look, I don't understand what you're talking about. Just talk in English.
Yeah, don't tell me I've gone viral. Just tell me what that means.
Absolutely. I was really alarmed when they told me I'd gone viral from a thing that I did. I did a debate just before Brexit. And the children were terribly overexcited and said, I've gone viral. And I said, well, that sounds dreadful. What have I done? I didn't even know it's being recorded. And streaming and all those things. They forget that those words are totally new to me. Every time one comes up, I have to rethink my vocabulary,
Oh, there's so much of that, isn't there? When you were writing Old Rage, did those changes that you've experienced, did they loom really large?
Yes, they did. I mean, I was on the extra vulnerable. I still am on the extremely vulnerable list. And I had to go into complete isolation. And I couldn't see anybody until I learned how to Zoom. I mean, I spoke to the children on the phone and they stood in the road and I stood at the open door occasionally, but I was completely isolated. And that was when they actually said, look, this is ridiculous. There's this thing where we can see your face. You've got to learn how to do it. So that's what we did. But I learned it on Zoom. I managed to get myself on and was shouting, unmute, and all that stuff. What do you mean? What are you talking about, you stupid children? But anyway, eventually I did get the hang of it. And it was a saviour for people that were on their own. It really was. I mean, to be locked down without any kind of communication like that must have been absolutely dreadful. And people forget that during lockdown, there were people that didn't have any connection and children that were trying to learn, doing all their lessons on iPads and things. Lots of families didn't have them and they were trying to do it on their dad's phone or something like that, and education has been set back terribly because of that. I don't know how those kids are ever going to catch up.
No, I mean, there was just an assumption, wasn't there, that people would be equipped to do it, that they would have the space to do it, that they,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, they said, I mean, our government, they've all went to eat and they've got no idea how the other half lives. And they can't imagine what it's like to be in a high-rise flat, stuck with a group of kids and one iPhone belonging to the father who wants to use it, or nothing.
No. I just saw something before I came on. One of the cabinet ministers had said, I'm sure that families will find that they can make their budget stretch if they buy value ranges. It's like,
I mean, it just, you don't know where to begin, do you really? I mean, such utter ignorance. They honestly do not understand what it's like to be poor or disabled or, they've learned to be compassionate. I mean, Eton is frightfully good at teaching people responsibility towards lesser beings and, a sort of society outlook and all that sort of thing. But unless you've really experienced it, you don't know what it's like to try and live on tuppence halfpenny a week. And then suddenly everything quadruples. And you can't cope. You just can't cope. It's as simple as that. God alone knows what people are going to do over the next year or whatever it is before we get back on our feet.
Yeah, we'll be lucky if it's a year, I think. I mean, you're very empathetic. Did that come from your childhood?
I don't know. Well, it comes mainly from my dad. I tell a story in the book, which is absolutely true. A person who's a counsellor told me it was an awful thing to have said to me. But my father, after the war, when I was 11, there were pictures and films of what they discovered in Belsen in the camps, which, I didn't know. And my dad showed me a picture of a little boy standing on a bench being pointed at by Nazis in white coats. And there was this man, Dr. Mengele, who did experiments on Jewish children. He was naked standing there, and it was the most appalling picture. And my dad showed it to me and said, this must never happen again, and it's down to you. And that it's down to you has haunted me all my life, I think. I'm sorry, I've just turned that off.
Don't worry.
I was 11. I was 7 when war broke out. And that has stayed with me, quite honestly. And I think that probably is the thing that's guided my entire life. It's down to you, both in my personal life and in trying to right wrongs in other people, what John used to call my Messiah complex, which, of course, if you go around helping people all the time, then very often they learn not to do it themselves. So I do understand that it can be an obsession that doesn't do a lot of good. But if I see something wrong, I have to do something about it. It's a kind of illness, really, in a way. I can't not do it. I can't shut up and mind my own business. I just can't. So, yes, if you can call it empathy, if you like, but I'd call it a disease.
Can you tell us a bit more about your childhood for listeners who don't know about your experience growing up?
Well, when I was born, my dad and mum worked in pubs. They worked for a brewery, so they kept being sent to different pubs. And I was born when they were in a hotel, working in a hotel on the Isle of Wight. So I was born in Blackgown. And then we moved to a pub in Berkshire. Then we moved to a pub in King's Cross. And they would live on the site. So in King's Cross, there was a flat above the pub where we lived. And they worked all the hours that God sent because, there was always what they called cellar work to be done. They had to work on the beers and things. There weren't all these lovely thermometers and things in those days. And then war broke out. Dad and Mum gave up the pubs and we lived in a place called Bexley Heath. And I think they did it because they wanted me to have a more settled life. And in fact, it was a disaster because it was what was called Bomb Alley, which is where all the guns and searchlights and things were trying to stop the German bombers get into the docks and the Woolwich Arsenal and Vickers Armstrong. And so it was an endless dogfight going on. So we lived down the shelters, really. When we went to school, we did our work down in the shelters, which is what makes me incredibly empathetic, for want of a better word, with the Ukrainians now. And then I changed schools, as you can imagine, lots of different times when they moved around. But then I did get a scholarship because in those days it wasn't free to go to a grammar school in Dartford, and had a wonderful education and wonderful teachers, but then left when I was about just 16 because I didn't know what university was. I mean, that seems very odd, but we didn't have telly or anything like that. So if you came from my background, I didn't know a single person that had been to university. That seems so unusual now, but I honestly didn't. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what Oxford and Cambridge was. I knew it was a boat race, but I didn't know anything, and I was quite a bright kid. And my teachers thought I could get what was called a state scholarship to Oxford or Cambridge. But it was the last thing I wanted to do. And I think somebody should have had the sense. And I've done this with other people who say they don't want to go to university. I've taken them to a university town to show them what it's like, because it's not like school. Do you know what I mean? It's totally different. So I've regretted not going for the rest of my life, quite honestly. But I did go to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and I had a very bad London accent at that time, and I spent most of the time, and you had to have received pronunciation, as it was called in those days.
Oh, yeah. Posh, basically.
Yeah, posh talk. And I had a hell of a time because most of the people at RADA in those days, because again, I was on a scholarship, were quite aristocratic. It was like a sort of finishing school in the 40s, late 40s and 50s. And so I was really on my own, me and somebody called Shaney Wallace, who was a Londoner. And I hated every minute of RADA, quite honestly. I don't think I learned a great deal. And then I went into the business and I did many years of weekly rep and tatty tours and all sorts of things.
How did you even know that RADA existed?
I think a teacher told me, quite honestly. I think when I got to school, I did some school plays and I probably was quite good in them. And they suggested I try for RADA, which I did, and got a scholarship. My parents couldn't have afforded to send me there. Well, they couldn't have paid the fees, but all the equipment that you need, it's the same as grammar school. My parents had a real difficulty in providing all the hockey sticks and things that you had to. But, I'm making it sound a really sad sob story, but my parents, really wanted me to have a wonderful life. But from a working class background, your parents want you to do better. And that still applies. Everybody wants their kids to have a better life than them. Sadly, I think this generation, we're going to look at our kids and think, what have we done to them? What with climate change and all the wars and Brexit and all those things where, there were interchanges of universities and all that has had to stop. So I don't think, however much you want it to be better, I don't think it will be for the next generation.
So much is made of the generational divide, isn't it? Do you believe in that, or do you think it's kind of a construct?
Oh, no, I think that people have tried to make it happen. But no, I think older people get on terribly well with the young, usually. Grannies can be a very useful member of the family because I find with my grandchildren, certainly the older ones, they can talk to me in a way that they can't talk to their parents because they know that I'll never tell anybody else what they've said to me. So if they have a real problem that's going to worry their parents badly, they will tell me and I will either try to solve it or, take some sort of measure. But I think I wish there were more. There are some old people's homes where they have children coming in, primary school children go in and play with the older people. And it works terribly well. It really does for both sides. The children love the old people with their stories, and the old people just love having youngsters around. So we should be working at bringing the generations together. I mean, it's mainly, a lot of these things are invented by the press, it's a kind of gimmicky thing. But certainly my own experience is that I get on very well with the young. I love young people, and I would loathe not to be involved with them. I often do advise. I mean, I do get a lot of letters as a result of my books, and people say how lonely they are. And, particularly widows and widowers. And I always say, well, seek out company, offer your services, go to the local school and see if they want somebody to read stories or, any sort of soup kitchen now, sadly enough. There are all sorts of ways where you can meet people. And I think that is something that's happened in lockdown, that a lot of people have got together to help cope with it, and certainly with the vaccination program and things like that, people have got together. But it's not happening at the top. It's really not. There are certain people living. I mean, Partygate is a classic example of it. There seems to have been another life going on that bore no resemblance to what most of us were experiencing. Me to a certain degree, but others to an appalling degree, dreadful, tragic degree. And that does make it difficult for people at the top to make changes if you lose your trust in them.
Yeah, and I think if there's a divide, that's where it is increasingly between the people at the top and the rest of us.
I saw a woman on Channel 4 and it moved me so much. And she was an elderly woman, but she said, never in her time, and I probably think this myself, but has there been so much, I can't remember the word she used, but she meant lack of moral compass in all spheres of society, certainly the government, the police, and the NHS. We discovered all sorts of things going on during lockdown that they were responsible for it, but there were certain people providing things for the NHS that were friends of the government and things like that. So corruption, if we're not careful, is becoming endemic in our society. And I have a feeling, but then I am working with Ukrainian refugees or refugees, full stop. And the people that are involved in that, the people that are helping, are amazingly dedicated to doing the right thing and helping people and trying to change things. So we mustn't forget that it isn't altogether true. Just as in Parliament, there are a lot of dedicated MPs. And I think a lot of them are deeply shocked by what's going on. And we mustn't forget that. And they're good constituency MPs, which is one of their main jobs.
In these last 5 years, which have been incredibly tough, in amongst the kind of fury, you haven't lost hope. You haven't lost faith in our capacity to change.
No, I haven't, because I think the younger generation want change. I want change. I don't think our political system works, and I think it needs to be rethought. The two-party system, adversarial system, I'd like to see a round parliament, so that they all sit round in a circle. I'd like them not to be members of a party. I'd like them to be there because they're experienced and want to do good. But I just know that it isn't working. And I think we all know it isn't working at the moment. Most of the youngsters I know are not political, as I was when I was young. They are dedicated to a cause. Of course, the environment, Black Lives Matter, Me Too. They've got all these campaigns for good. And while that's going on, I'm hopeful. What they need is somebody to listen to them and make it happen. But I think the young people are looking for a better world, and we've just got to make it possible for them to achieve it.
You've always been a big campaigner, haven't you? I mean, you were involved in Greenham Common, amongst other things.
Yes, so when I'm involved, I went down there occasionally. Let's not pretend I put up with what those women did. I mean, they were amazing. They were amazing. They were reviled and abused, and they stuck it out freezing cold in the mud, being kicked by people. And, they were amazing. But I went down on all the lovely occasions when we embraced the bass and all that. It was lovely, wonderful. I enjoyed it. So, yes, but my first campaign, funnily enough, I was thinking about it the other day. I went for a walk with one of my grandchildren during lockdown, which I shouldn't have done, around around Westminster. And we were at 10 Downing Street. And I was saying to her, you can't believe it, but when I was young, these gates weren't here. You could go up to the front door and there was one copper on duty and you could hand in a petition. And my first one was for Ruth Ellis, the murder book, which affected me profoundly because it was appalling that this woman, as she would in those days and as she did, hang. So I had a massive petition. I had loads of pieces of paper and lists and God knows what. And I staggered up to the front door and handed it to the policeman, and in it went. And that was my first one. And I went many times with other petitions and things. And I remember a couple once saying, oh, not you again. But, it was wonderful that you could do that in those days. You really could. And unfortunately, that is much more difficult. And an act has just been passed in Parliament. It's been slipped by last week, where it's going to be more difficult to demonstrate and to object. There are things coming in that are going to restrict that sort of behaviour, which appalls me. We have to have the right to protest. We have to have the right to say, no, we don't agree with that, whatever it is. And that can be people that I disagree with have the right to say it as well. And we need to talk about it.
It's the way they sneak things through when you're looking the other way as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's such an important bill.
Yeah.
And it just slid through with nothing.
No, they're very good at that, this lot. They're very good at distracting. They're very good at manipulating things, releasing a bit of news that's going to get the headlines while they do something that is really wrong, in my opinion, or some people's opinion, maybe not all, but at least should have been talked about more.
Yeah, at least discussed. I want to talk to you a bit more about your career. You said, you left RADA and you went into, was effectively touring rep, wasn't it? And a few times in the book, you kind of almost do yourself down a little bit, like you say you were also ran. And did you feel that way when you were acting? Did you feel like you were kind of a poor relation?
Yes, I just accepted the fact that I'm a working actress. Do you know what I mean? People often say to people like me, what part would you like to play? I'm not in that position. I never have been. I play the parts that I'm offered if I like them. Do you know what I mean? And if they pay reasonably well, because I had a family. And so I kind of accept. And when I started in the business, you did have to be a bit classy. And, the West End was full of really rather elegant, well-spoken, good-looking actresses. And I was never that. So I did weekly rep. I did it, in various places. But I wouldn't have missed it for the world in retrospect, because I learned, I write about it in my book. I was in Oldham doing tatty weekly rep for about a year at the time when the mills were closing down. So I got to know and live in a lot of societies, Workington, Oldham, all over the country. I've toured. I know Britain. I really do. And I know what it was like in those days. So therefore, I understand a lot more what's going on now, because I led a tour of the Royal Shakespeare Company during the miners' strike. And all those sort of things I've been in the middle of, being the sort of actress I am. And my passion has always been to try and take good things to the public, like Shakespeare, or to make them laugh. I would love to have had a classical career. I worship the classics. I love seeing Shakespeare myself, and I loved being at the Royal Shakespeare Company when I did eventually get there, but too late to play all the big roles. And I envy those people in a way, but in a way I don't, because I've done comedy and I've worked with people like, all sorts of funny people like Frankie Howard and Kenny Williams, and that they don't do. When I was younger, when I was beginning to get known, I did a lot of sitcoms, Rag Trade, Now Take My Wife, endless, Bed Sick Girl. They're all lost now and gone. But during that period, I had the most enormous fun. And the public loved them. We got audiences of millions. Now, you're lucky if you get 5 million or 6 million. We got 20 million or 18 million or something, like John with the Sweeney. So we were loved by the public, or sometimes not loved, but on the whole, we were part of the public. Do you know what I mean? Doing those sort of shows.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and the rag trade was really groundbreaking, wasn't it? I mean, it was a sitcom about working class women.
It was, it never gets mentioned when people talk about what happened to women, the history of feminism and all that, and the working class, the emergence of the working class on television, which they weren't very much when I was young. I often sort of regret that our funny little show is not mentioned because, as you say, it was about a group of women working in a sewing factory, and they had a union, and our catchphrase was "everybody out," which became a catchphrase all around the country, and the women had the best parts in it. It was Miriam Carlin, Barbara Windsor, Esma Khan and me. And it was in its funny way. I mean, it was slapstick comedy, but in its own way, it broke all sorts of barriers. And I did a show called Now Seriously. I complained to the BBC once that they were giving me rubbish to do all the time. And the man in charge at that time said, "Okay, well, you can have an hour to do what you like with."
Amazing.
And that, of course, was horrific. But there was a wonderful man called Barry Took who did lots of shows, and he got together some people in Cambridge, which were now very famous. Now they are. And I did this show called Now Seriously at Sheila Hancock, and it was a sort of sketch come singing show. And that was a big breakthrough, but not the sort of breakthrough that gets a lot of coverage, really.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's funny, but it's not funny because it's, in a way, what we're seeing now is that there's a lot of talk about diversity and better representation, but it doesn't really stretch to class.
No, you're right. I think it's forgotten. Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of the problems with women of colour in our profession is very often a class thing. And certainly my background was no help in my career, I tell you. It was help to me as a child, and I loved them, and it was wonderful. But I would have been better if I'd have gone to a good school and a good university. I'd have started at the beginning with a big advantage. It took me years to get to any kind of level. You're absolutely right. I think that class is one of them. In fact, I've just been reading in the paper this morning, which cheered me up no end, is that Cambridge is sort of recognizing if you want to get diversity in the Russell Group universities, you've got to stretch beyond the private schools, which they're already trying to do with the universities. But you've also got to be very careful that you pick up the right people who can't afford school dinners for a start, rather than just people who go to state schools, because a lot of people who go to state schools, if you've got a good one in the area, are middle class people. Now, I think we worry too much about middle class people being advantaged, because middle class people do make enormous progress all the way through history for everybody. So let's not deride them too much. But nevertheless, I'd like more people to have the luck that I had of moving from working class to a sort of middle class. Bit phony, but a sort of middle class.
Yeah. What kind of point was it in your career, do you think, that you felt like really able to be yourself? Like, this is me, this is who I am.
Well, I suppose most recently in the Canal programme with Giles, because there it was all ad lib. We just talked and interviewed people and saw things new. And so it was absolutely genuine. And it was just me being interested in things. So that was the nearest I've got to feeling, this is what I'm like, really. I can be what I like. But, an actor, you have to constantly be other people anyway. You've got to pretend to be other people. That's your job.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But you had to a greater extent, because you had to, get a posh voice. And
yes, even when I got my posh voice, I didn't get great roles. as a posh lady because it wasn't real. Do you know what I mean? There's something about me that is very common. And I've never been able to get. I remember listening to the critics once. I did a play at the Royal Court, a restoration play. And this is years ago. A critic would never say anything like this before, but somebody praised my performance in this restoration play at the court. And a woman critic said, yes, but she is a bit common, isn't she, for restoration?
How rude.
Well, you couldn't say that now, bless her heart. And she was absolutely right. She was absolutely right. I did vulgarise it. I'm quite sure.
No, I won't have that.
Yeah, I think I did. I wasn't as classy as... now my performance in that would be absolutely all right. But in those days, you did have to speak the language beautifully and be conscious of poise and how you look and wearing the costume beautifully and all that. And I'm quite sure I didn't. But anyway, one of the other critics that were talking about it did like me, so that's all right. I don't usually even read the critics, but this was a radio thing that I just happened to hear.
Yeah, no, best not to. I think it was Desert Island Discs, and maybe you had your best voice on for it. That was in 2000, and your voice was very received pronunciation. And then by the time you were doing interviews last year, you sounded like you sound now, like more, a bit more like you.
I've done Desert Island Discs twice, actually. So it was probably the early one that I did. Yeah, no, I mean, it's wonderful that actors don't have to be like that now. It is wonderful that Henry V can be black and have a Cockney accent.
Yeah.
Because, it works. And it was terribly limiting casting. It was terribly limiting. And only beautiful girls. I did a play called Rattle of a Simple Man, and I got awards for it in the West End, and it was a great part. And, it was wonderful. And then they did the film of it, and they cast Dion Cilento, who was a beautiful girl, beautiful woman, bit like me, a beautiful version of me. So I can understand why. And, I totally accepted that was all right. In films, you were beautiful. It's as simple as that. And I never thought I could possibly be in films. And funnily enough, the director, Muriel Box, years later, apologized to me for that. She said, I'm so sorry, but the powers that be made me cast it. And she had seen me in the play. But, you didn't even think, oh, that's a bit unfair, really. So, things have got so much better. As I'm talking to you, I'm thinking how much better it is, really. I mean, like women directors. I was the first woman director in the Olivier Theatre at the National. And that was only because Ian McKellen had me in his company, who was a friend of mine. It wasn't the powers that be at the National that chose me. And then with the Royal Shakespeare Company, I asked, they were going to cancel the small scale tour because they hadn't got funding for it. And that shocked me. And I said, no, we should be going around the country with Shakespeare with a tent and all that. And they said, well, all right, you can do it, to shut me up. Yeah. And I did. I raised the money and we did it. But at the management meetings at that time, which I had to go to because I was then in charge of a company, I used to be the only woman. I remember the meetings used to go on with quite a bit of booze and fags until quite late in the morning. And I had a babysitter,
Oh, typical, yeah.
But that is just not happening at all now. It really isn't. I mean, there are amazing women directors increasingly in television and in theatre. So that has shifted so much in my lifetime, and I'm so glad it has. And I think it will happen for people of various ethnicities. The public absolutely accept what we call blind casting. They don't worry about it. They really don't. If you have a person playing a black father with a white child or something like that, if it's well enough acted, they just accept it, just as they'll have a person with a big nose. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So things are shifting. But these changes, we have to bring people along, and myself included. The Black Lives Matter was a wake-up call for me, I must say, because I realised that I honestly knew nothing about our history in the colonies. I'd not learnt it at school. It wasn't taught. We were just shown all the red bits on the map and told the British Empire was wonderful. I knew nothing about it. Nothing.
I don't think it's much different now. Just like the
No, I
teaching?
think that they're trying to bring it. I think the youngsters themselves are. I know one of my grandchildren wrote us in school saying you must up your curriculum and put in the true story of the colonies. And, they're conscious of it. I don't know where we're going to go next. That's what troubles me. I really don't. I won't be here to see it. But I mean, the seismic changes are happening now. And we seem to be choosing the most appalling leaders all the time. Around the world. And it's because people are unhappy. People are aware that something is wrong, and therefore a big personality comes along and says, I'll make this better. They vote for them. It all comes down to education. It's very important that our education system works well.
Yeah, it really is. You're incredibly driven, aren't you? You must be 89 now, are you? And you're still
Yes, I'm 19.
Working furiously and still wondering where the next job is coming from, unbelievably. Can you imagine ever stopping?
No, honestly, I can't. I dream of it because I have friends who are now sitting back and enjoying life and, but I don't know how to do it. I really don't know how to do it. I have a lovely free day in my diary and I think, oh, that would be good. I've got nothing to do. And I wake up and think, God, what am I going to do? I should be doing something. I must write. I must read. I must research. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of deep in me. I wish it wasn't. I don't admire or like it. I really think being driven is absurd. And I urge people not to do that, to make their lives full of pleasure, because you only got one life, so relish the pleasure. And it's too late now to change. I know that. I'll be desperately trying to do things as I die. I'll be like this, planning some god-awful rescue scheme that people don't want. And as I'm dying, I can't imagine not joining in. It's joining in, really, isn't it? Some people are quite happy when they get older to say, okay, I've done my bit, and they have. I now deserve to put my feet up and enjoy myself a bit. And that's what I'm going to do. And I so admire that. I think that's what you should do, because all the things I do are not much use anyway. They'll make tiny pinpricks of change, but very, very little.
But the tiny pinpricks all join up, don't they?
Well, I don't know.
Hope.
Yeah.
You seem incredibly strong and sometimes quite fierce and angry. Are you one of those people who's like paddling furiously underneath?
Oh, yes. I'm not terribly strong. I'm really not. Again, that goes back to my childhood. I had to be. If you got bullied, you had to fight back and you had to continue. And if you were bombed, if your roof came off and your windows were out and people were killed, then you'd got to get up the next day and get on with it, and pull yourself together. It was a phrase that my mother had a lot. Oh, Sheila, pull yourself together. And I do try to do that. But underneath, there is a lot of grief, a lot of grief, not just for me, but for what I see around me. And that drives me as well. And that's what I can't let go. Do you know what I mean? When I see like what's happening at the moment and what happened in Afghanistan, I wish I could not look at the news. I try not to, and just think it's not my job now to try and do anything about that. It so moves me and so devastates me that I find I've got to do something. It's like putting a bandage on a wound. Do you know what I mean? I can't just sit there and watch it. It's not helpful half the time, my grief, but that's a bit what drives me. Grief and fear is what drives me. Fear is a big one.
Fear always driven you?
Yes, from wartime childhood, yes. And certainly a bit the insecurity of my very early childhood of not having a home, just, being in digs, as it were, for a long while. But certainly the war, I was very frightened a lot of the time. If that's in your formative years, it's there. However much you work on it, I don't think it goes away. That's your first reaction. If as a child, your first reaction is, oh, they're going to hurt me, or that plane is sounding as though it's going to drop something. And then your first reaction, I think, for the rest of your life is, oh, somebody's going to hurt me, or that situation is going to hurt me. And then you say, okay, I'll deal with it, because you have to. But I'm certainly not as strong as I look. Or when I'm on my own, I'm very unstrong.
It's like being a little bit like being on a permanent state of alert, isn't it?
I think it is, yes. It's a good description. Yeah, one is alert to danger. I suppose everybody is to a certain extent, aren't they? I mean, although that's not true. I have got friends who really are very comfortable with life. You know, they don't expect things to go wrong. I expect everything to go wrong. Every play I've been in, I thought, well, that's going to be a flop. You know, that's going to be a disaster. But I do have lovely friends who relish the good things of life. And I'm apt to think I don't deserve them.
Oh, that makes me sad.
Oh, don't be sad.
You do deserve them. You so do. And how have your rage levels been as you've got older?
Well, they're less concealed. I think that's the thing. When you get old, you don't care so much what people think. That's one of the advantages of old age, because you're not going to be here much longer. So you think, oh, well, doesn't matter. You know, if people don't like me, I'll have to put up with it for a little while until I die. So therefore, I'm much less polite. I'm afraid to say less kind than I used to be. I mean, if somebody is doing a job badly, supposing, I don't know, even a builder or something like that, I don't say, would you mind me just mentioning that perhaps, I say, you're doing that wrong. Do you mind doing it again? You know what I mean? It's a difference between, I'm awfully tired of having to apologize for disagreeing. I hope you don't mind me saying, well, yes, you're right, but, you know, I just want to be able to be honest and probably wrong. People can contradict me, but I want to be able to say what I think. Whereas a lot of my life, certainly my early life, as a woman, I haven't always said what I thought. And I love the fact that in terms of the Me Too movement, girls are putting up with much less nonsense than I did as a girl. So, yeah, I've always been a bit angry, but now I'm old. And one of the things is that I'm so shocked that nothing changes. You know, I've got to the age where things are coming round again. The same mistakes are being made. We don't seem to have learned. And that makes me beside myself with rage. You know, the recent thing in Afghanistan, you know, when you think people died to try and change that country. Now, whether we should have gone in there or not, you know, is debatable. But then we just left it and it's chaos there. When things like that happen, I think, oh, what's the bloody point? Really, honestly, we never learn. Yeah. So that makes me angry.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. You mentioned Me Too just now. Are there things that you wish you hadn't put up with in your career?
Oh, yes. When I did a program that they gave me, actually to shut me up because I was complaining about only doing rubbish sitcoms. And they gave me a thing called Now Seriously at Sheila Hancock, which then became a series called Simply Sheila, which was review sketches and interviews and all sorts of things. And there was one sketch which I'd done in the theatre, which was about a very racist and horrible landlady who hated everybody and was a vicious sketch by a wonderful writer called Ken Howard. And then the person who was directing it, who was a man, said, you can't do that, Sheila. And I said, why not? And he said, along the lines of, it's going to destroy your image, which at that point was Tizzy Blonde, you know, from the rag trade and things like that. And I said, well, I know it works and I want to do it. And he said, well, I'm going to say you can't. Now, it was the one time and I thought, okay, I'm not going to take this line down. I said, can I take it higher? So I went to the head of comedy and he said, I don't think you should do it either. And I then went to the head of the BBC, Hugh Weldon, and I said, I want to do this sketch. And it was unheard of, I dare I say, for a woman to stand up for herself, a young woman like that. And anyway, he and all of them eventually said, look, you can do it to the studio audience. And if it goes well, it can go in the program. But we're not happy about it. Anyway, I did it and it went like a bomb and it went in the program. And I didn't work for the BBC for 10 years after that.
Wow.
So, you know, it wasn't possible for women. And then along came Jennifer and Dawn doing their own material, writing their own material. And all that changed. They were bold and fearless and stood up for themselves, probably helped by the fact that it was two of them. But when I was young, it was unheard of. And I look back and I think, oh, God, why did I put up with that? And on that one occasion, that's why I didn't, because you couldn't, you know. You were punished.
Yeah, the repercussions.
And even now, you said earlier something about you come over as strong. I know if somebody says Sheila's very strong, they find it offensive. Do you know what I mean? It's another word for difficult, for embarrassing, for saying things that are not necessarily necessary to be said. It's still difficult for women to really say what they think boldly and without saying, I hope you don't mind me saying, but I think. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, or like at the end kind of saying, oh, but don't worry if not, you know.
Yes. It's only my opinion, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, yes, I do look back, and also all the sort of bum pinching and stuff that went on that we put up with in those days. It was, girls just now would thump somebody.
Yeah, quite right too. Yeah.
And quite right.
Yeah. I mean, from where I'm sitting now, I can't imagine anybody ever daring to pinch your bum, but I'm sure they did a lot.
Well, I didn't look like I do now. I didn't have white hair and looked relatively dignified.
Stop it, you look fabulous.
But it's, it is a burden to be what is known as a strong woman. And that alone undermines you a bit. Do you know what I mean? You think, oh God, I'm going to get a lot of stick for this if I say what I think.
Yeah, it's those words, isn't it, that are never used, never applied to men.
No, being strong as a man is really, really good. I do think it's changed. I do think it's changed a lot. Girls are speaking out for themselves a great deal more now than they did. And we have lots of women in position of power now. Not enough, but we have got women in position. And women writers, which is vital. That's one of the biggest changes in television, all the wonderful women writers. But it's so silly because women have got so much to offer. That's what's distressing. They are wise in a way, women. The maternal instinct does make you very caring, unless you've been injured and therefore are not very good at that. But on the whole, I think we have so much to offer. It's interesting in the lockdown how well the New Zealand Premier did. What's her name?
Jacinda Ardern.
Yes, and Angela Merkel. There was none of that. We are going to fight them. We are going to defeat this virus. We are going to blah, blah, blah.
All that war language. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was very sensibly approached and they were very successful.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? I could keep you talking all day, but I better not. I just need to ask you the questions that I always ask at the end. Yeah. What's your emotional age?
2.
Why?
Well, because I'm so emotionally unstable and so undisciplined, I suppose.
Are you really?
Yes, my emotions are. They fly around a bit. Immature I am. At 89, I'm immature. Okay. I will mature before I die.
Oh, please don't. Can you give us a book recommendation?
Yes, Shaggy Bane I've just read. And it's one of the most amazing depictions of poverty and a woman alcoholic. I mean, it's sounding awfully dreary. It's also funny.
No, it's brilliant.
I was so moved by it. The detail, it's obviously a biography, although he calls it a novel, but it gutted me. But I thought, oh, please, everybody read this because you see what it's like to be in a broken family. You actually live the terrible experience of having a mother who is wonderful but can't cope and living in a community, all of whom are helping one another, but at the same time, all of them at 60s and 70s. It's an amazing book. I loved it. I hope it goes on to the school syllabuses because it's a beautiful piece of writing, but it's also a revelation, I think.
Brilliant. What advice would you give younger women?
I suppose just be yourself. I think have the courage to be yourself. And by that, I mean, don't think you've got to look a certain way and your hair's got to be a certain way and you've got to please the boys by doing certain things and you've got to do a job that maybe your teachers have said you can do because you can't do something else. But know yourself and be yourself, I think is really important.
Thank you. Who is your old bird role model?
But there's nobody older than me.
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody who's older. The Queen, I suppose, is a pretty good. I mean, it's not role model, is not the word, but I admire her. I did hugely admire Bette Davis when I worked with her. She was very old when I worked with her, and she was herself. She didn't give a damn about what people thought. I mean, she sacked everybody at the beginning of the film because they wanted her to do it sort of method acting and with rotten lighting and all that. She got rid of them all. and lit herself and did it her way, which she knew is what the public wanted. And it's a bloody good way, you know. And she had a terrible time with men. She wrote some very good biographies, actually, one very good autobiography. And she fought the studio system, you know, and I'm sure she got a hell of a lot. Well, I know she got a hell of a lot of stick and not as much praise as she should have done. I was doing a shot with her. You know, you go behind the camera to feed people lines. And I had to feed her lines for a couple of lines that she had on camera. And it was amazing. You know, I did my lines and she did this. And at the end of it, I said, well done, Miss Davis. That was wonderful. And she said, oh, thank you, honey. All I ever get usually is printed. And what she meant was that normally she did it and it was kind of expected of her.
Yeah.
And they just said, okay, that'll do, and moved on. Nobody thought to say, you're terrific, because they were frightened of her or whatever, you know. And me, I was shaking when I said it, but I thought, I've got to tell her, it's marvellous. And I know she was suspicious of me because I'd been in the stage production of the film that we were doing. And I think she thought I was a modern actress who probably wouldn't like her style. But my God, I admired her. I admired her as a person and as an actor.
Yeah, she was incredibly brave, wasn't she? I mean, she really stood up for herself. And
one of the things she said was, growing old is not for sissies, she said. And that, again, was very true. Yeah, she would be my role model. Yeah, I'd like to be like her.
Oh. Is that your experience of growing old, that's not for sissies?
Yes, I'm afraid so. I'm certainly, health-wise, I do have a lot of things wrong with me. And that's boring. But it's acceptable, you know. It's, you know, when I was young, I had acne, and then I had breast cancer when I was middle-aged. So, you know, those sort of things dog you all your life. And just when you're old, you're more likely maybe to get nasty things that your body doesn't function as well. And I fight it. I go to the gym and I walk and I do all those things to keep going. But sometimes I think, oh, I'd love to just curl up and not bother, you know. That's the big thing about when you get old, that you really would rather stay in bed.
What's your superpower apart from getting out of bed?
Being able to entertain. I would love to be able to do a wonderful meal without having hysterics, and entertain my friends in the way that they entertain me sometimes. And I just get food from Ottolenghi when it's my time.
I'm sure they're happy.
Yeah, well, I think they probably are, but it doesn't seem very generous to do that compared with all the effort. I'm a member of a book club, and we take it in turns to go to one another's houses, and they do the most amazing feasts, and they always look immaculate. And if I dare to do anything, I look like the wreck of the Hesperus. I'm sweating and shaking with fear at the things not burning and vegetables finishing at the same time as the meat and all that. Yeah, that would be lovely. If I could learn to cook well, that would be really good.
Well, there's plenty of time.
No, I haven't got time. I can barely cope with what I have got to do.
And lastly, as you've got older, how much more or less of a damn do you give?
Oh dear, that's two-pronged. I don't give a damn about myself so much. The way I look, or, I wear hardly any makeup, and I'm wearing a filthy old T-shirt. But I do give a damn about the world, where the world's going. I care terribly about that. But I don't really give a damn about myself.
Thank you so much. I've had the best hour. I hope you have, once we got over our technical problems. Thank you very much. It's been absolutely wonderful. And really good luck with the book. I'm sure it will fly. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. You can hear a new episode of The Shift each Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please do rate, review and follow, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to support The Shift further, please consider becoming a member of our community. Find out more at steady.media/The Shift.